He opens the magazine and it was pornography. And to me as a 12-year-old kid, it felt like a kick in the stomach. No matter how sincere I was, somehow I always found a way back to the lust. I was thinking, that's it. Marriage solves the problem with lust. Just get married and you'll never have a problem with lust again. I mean, it's just, lust's mantra is more, more, more. It's always gonna want more. And the second thing is that it will always demand that you cross lines that you said you'd never crossed before.
Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm Dr. Richard Marks, Director of Connect Us for Life Ministries and Vice President of the Board for Mastering Life Ministries, the producer of this program. Today, we have the leader of what I consider to be one of the most balanced ministries for sex addicts that there is. His name is Jonathan Daugherty, and he is the founder and director of Be Broken Ministries of San Antonio, Texas. On this first of 2 episodes, Jonathan is going to describe for us, using his own story, the genesis of sexual addiction by taking us back to his first awakening to porn when he was 12 years old, and describing how that progressed into a full-blown bondage to the idols found in pornography. Make no mistakes, my brothers and sisters. It tells us in Ephesians chapter 5 that sexual immorality is idolatry. It is a putting one's hope for fulfillment, for satisfaction, for identity completion in the creature rather than the Creator. It is a lusting after someone in the heart, which Jesus equated with adultery. Porn and other sexual addictions are serious matters. So we are very fortunate to have Jonathan Daugherty with us for the next 2 weeks, teaching us how the twisted paths of lust and idolatry can be conquered through our Lord Jesus Christ.
I do remember when I was 12 years old experiencing a trauma in my introduction to pornography. I'd spent the night at a friend's house, and the next morning we got up and we were horsing around in the woods behind his house, and next thing you know, we're heading out into this open field because my friend said, hey, I want to show you something. And there's just grass out in this field, and there's a tree stump out in the middle of the field. And I remember as he's walking in front of me, I'm thinking, well, we're going to see something dead in this field. I mean, it's got to be, that's what it is. That's what my 12-year-old mind was thinking. We're going to see a carcass, you know? And he gets to this tree stump and he reaches down into the tree stump, and I'm still thinking, well, he's going to pull an animal out of there or something, like a rabbit out of a hat or something. And he pulls out this rolled up magazine. I still didn't know what was about to happen. He opens the magazine and it was pornography. And to me as a 12-year-old kid, it felt like a kick in the stomach because I didn't know what to do. I kind of felt 2 things going on at the same time. One was I felt a sense of guilt and fear, like I just needed to look over my shoulder, like something inside me, I couldn't have explained it, but something inside me told me this just doesn't feel right. Just something's not right about this. But at the same time, something woke up in a powerful way in me that I didn't even know as a 12-year-old kid I possessed. And I would discover later was my sexuality. I didn't know I was a sexual being. And that was an overwhelming rush that I had simultaneous with kind of this guilt and fear. And so we spent 5 or 10 minutes just thumbing through the magazine. I'm battling between these 2 really strong emotions. And eventually he put the magazine back in the tree stump and we walked off the field, and that set a hook in me. I walked off with a secret because I didn't think I could tell anybody about it. And from that moment on, it's like just a building curiosity towards things that were sexual. Even though at that point in time, I didn't even really understand what sex was. I didn't understand even what sexuality was. I just know that something really felt powerful when I saw that pornography. And so I started searching for similar type material. And I looked in my house, I looked all through my parents' bedroom, I looked in the attic, I looked in the garage, I looked in our barn, I looked everywhere for porn and didn't find any. And I was frustrated because my dad had done a good job, obviously, of keeping that kind of stuff out of our home. But my friends, their dads had their material, or at least they knew where their stash was. Some of them even had their porn out on the coffee table. And here I was thinking, why is it so hard for me to find this material, when I've got all this curiosity? But I did find JCPenney catalogs, and that was kind of enough to get the fantasy wheels turning. And I remember just looking through the lingerie sections in those catalogs. And keep in mind, at this point in time, I had not yet been educated really on what sex was. So these fantasies, they weren't quote unquote sexual fantasies. They were more about kind of setting the paradigm of what I believe sexual addiction is all about, and that is self in the center, and then everything else revolving around self. And so I was developing sort of a self-centered mindset that said these fantasies were about these women who were looking at me, smiling at me, all about me, everything to make me feel better. And that's kind of what set me on course throughout my junior high and high school years. All of this, though, was going on secretly. I wasn't telling anybody about this. And part of it was because I think some of it was a conscience issue, because I did grow up in a good Christian home where I was taught values, I was taught the truth, I was taught right from wrong, I was taught morality. And even as a kid, I understood that these things were outside of that there was something about pornography in its essence that just didn't line up with what was healthy or right or moral. And so some of it was a conscience issue, some of it was just a fear issue, because I didn't know if I would be accepted or abandoned if I were to let anybody know about what I was doing. Because I was seen as the good Christian kid, right? I mean, my dad was an elder in the church, and so in my mind, there was sort of an image to upkeep, even though I didn't necessarily understand all the ramifications of what that meant. And so during this whole time period, I really started building a double life. And I started doing what I call image building. I was getting really good at building a persona that I would project to other people so that they would see me for something that I really wasn't. And that became the way for me to keep everything hidden. Just show people what you think they want to see so that they're satisfied with who they think I am, and then just do whatever you want. I had become a believer at the age of 6. I mean, even at the age of 6, I understood enough about the gospel that I was able to express faith in God through Christ. And so that was where some of the confusion came throughout my building addiction, was as I got further and further into my addiction, lots of doubts crept into my mind about the validity of what happened spiritually as a 6-year-old kid. But as I look back on it, I think that as I was growing in this secret addiction, as it was becoming more about pornography, and eventually it included masturbation, and eventually led to actual encounters with other people, the fact, I think, that there was such a tension and such a weight because of my growing divide between who I was presenting myself to be and who I was on the inside, it actually ended up in my recovery confirming to me what happened as a 6-year-old kid, that I don't believe that some of the weight that I was carrying through my addiction would have been as heavy had I not actually had the Spirit of God within me, convicting me and grieving and calling me back, I just became good at not listening because I was listening more to the addiction and more to the lust than I was to the still small voice of the Lord asking me to change my ways. I did not love the addiction. I hated it. And part of it was, sort of a self-hatred because, hey, who was doing the behavior? Me. So eventually, I started, so much shame was built up that I did develop sort of a self-hatred. And then the line between me understanding who I really was in Christ versus who I was in my behavior became totally blurred, to the point where I really did see myself as a despicable, shameful, just loathsome person. And so there was a lot of self-hatred. I confessed 1,000 times. I confessed 10,000 times. And that's what always brought so much frustration, was I just had this assumption that the way God worked in these types of situations, when you've got a sort of a besetting habitual sin, My mind, even as a kid, was that, well, it says if you confess, you're forgiven and cleansed of all unrighteousness. And I thought that was an instantaneous thing that meant every urge is now removed from me, and therefore every temptation is removed from me. And it didn't happen that way. It wasn't like a thing where I'd come, and I always felt like I was authentic and genuine in my hurt and in my brokenness and in my confession. But it seemed to me that no matter how sincere I was, somehow I always found a way back to the lust. Somehow I always found a way back to those behaviors. Because all these confessions, they were authentic, they were genuine, but they were all isolated and secretive. I was confessing all this sort of in my closet, so to speak. And no one else knew about what was going on. And I think for me, that's where a lot of the doubts about God started coming in. Was God powerful enough? Does he love me? Does he care? I mean, because if he does, wouldn't he just take it all away? And that was where a lot of confusion came from, because I hadn't quite understood yet the dynamic of what God wants in community and relationship as part of the healing process from an addiction.
Your passion beats for Christ alone. Your passion.
Of course, I had no idea as a teenager what was chemically going on. I've learned a lot since then in the fact of just how powerful a drug our sexuality can be if it's abused. The place in your brain in which pleasure chemicals are released for orgasm is the exact same place in your brain that those pleasure chemicals are released for heroin or cocaine addiction. So it's a powerful thing. You put that sort of possibility in the hands of a 14-year-old kid, that anytime he wants to change his mood, all he's got to do is go masturbate and fantasize, and next thing you know, he's having a high, he's having a rush. And that's why I was so hooked in those early years, in those teenage years, of just wanting to change my mood and be able to do it in a very powerful way. And I think what was happening is that connected to a spiritual thing that was going on was that I was growing more and more numb spiritually, because the more I would engage in these physical behaviors that were clearly outside of the boundaries of what God has established for how our sexuality is to be expressed, it's like with each experience, I was just getting a little more numb, a little more deaf and blind to the voice of God. It's like the sun setting. It's like the further you go in your addiction, this growing darkness just kind of overwhelms you, to the point at which eventually I'm just living in the night, emotionally, spiritually. It's like the light went out. Now that's from my perspective, from an emotional standpoint and from how I felt. That didn't necessarily represent the truth of the matter. It's not like God left me, but in terms of the numbing effect and just the atmosphere in my being from continually giving in and saying yes to my lust, it's like a sort of death and darkness came over me. I think of it in terms of, the passage that says the wages of sin is death. It's like that's a statement about what happens as we pay into sin and we keep paying into sin. It brings us a type of death. As I got through high school, everything to that point had been just a growing addiction of fantasy, pornography, masturbation. It hadn't yet gone into like, quote unquote, real encounters. But that all changed in college. It's like I got more freedom, or what I considered to be freedom, meaning I wasn't having to live under my parents' roof. I could do whatever I want, whenever I wanted. And so I started playing out some of these fantasies with some girls. I started having these sexual experiences. And what's interesting is I didn't abandon my Christian life, so to speak. I was still leading Bible studies at one of the campus ministries there. But I kind of became what I call daytime me and nighttime me. And so daytime me is over here leading these Bible studies at a Christian ministry, and nighttime me is on the other side of town at night doing things that I don't want daytime me people to know about. And so I kind of juggled these two worlds. And the tension just grew, because I don't think God intended any of us to live divided lives. We were to live transparent integrity, lives of integrity, and not be divided like that. And so as the tension mounted, I kept wanting solutions, and I did all the confession stuff, and I mean, it just seemed like I just could not break free. And then I met a girl in my junior year in college that just totally wowed me. I mean, just totally impressed me. She was an amazing Christian girl, and the first thing I noticed about her was that there just seemed to be no pretense, no facade, no mask. And that was very unusual because, unfortunately, to that point in my life, being involved in a lot of Christian circles, I'd become very accustomed to seeing the mask, seeing people just kind of put the veil over their eyes, and you're not getting in to any part of who they really are. It's just going to be what I call putting on Sunday's best. And that's not just clothing. It's like they just put on the face. But this girl was different. She didn't have any of that. And so it kind of mesmerized me, and I started pursuing her. But I was presenting to her the image. I was presenting to her daytime me. And I tell guys this all the time, the image we build is just like a fantasy. It's perfect. There's no flaws in the image. We've polished it. We present it in such a way as there's no flaw in the image. And so it's almost like, how could anybody actually reject the image that you're portraying? Because it's perfect. And so she fell for me, and she fell for the image, and we started dating, and it really got serious eventually. Not physically, but I mean, it got serious in the fact that she was the real deal. And as we got even more serious to talk about marriage, I started feeling those old feelings of guilt, because I felt like I was committing some sort of like relationship fraud. Here she's being real with me because it's obvious she's the real deal, and I am only giving her the tip of the iceberg. And so I did end up confessing to her that I wasn't a virgin, because I felt like there's no way I can live with myself if I go into this marriage without her knowing something of what my history is like. And that was a difficult thing for her to get over and to get through, but she eventually did, and she said, listen, I love you, and I still want to marry you. And that's when I tucked things away. Two things happened at that point when she said that she wanted to move forward. The first one was that I knew that I was marrying up. She was way out of my league. I mean, she was an amazing, gracious woman. But the second thing that happened was I decided I would never tell her anything else about any other part of the secret. And this is a common thing that I think happens with a lot of folks. Not that we're trying to say, I'm not going to tell anything else so that I can keep putting a whole bunch of things into the dark. The idea is I'm not going to tell her anything else because, hey, we're going to start something totally new. This is going to be a fresh start. And therefore, I'm never going to go back to that anymore. And it's kind of that mindset that says, if I just start something new, then I can move past all of this. And the problem is just starting something new without like bringing all the junk out into the light, it just creates eventually a vacuum effect. Because unless you bring it into the light, it's still going to have this tug on you. And every time you face a temptation, then it's like, well, I've got some things in there that nobody else knows about, so I can probably put one more thing in there. And that's what eventually happened in my marriage. Because, the first 5 or 6 weeks were great. I didn't have any lust struggles the first 5 weeks of my marriage. And I was thinking, that's it. Marriage solves the problem with lust. Just get married and you'll never have a problem with lust again. And then after the honeymoon period was over, I started realizing we were extremely different. Not just different, we were opposites. And as with any relationship, that created some stress. And my stress reliever was always to go back into the porn and the lust. And so that's what I started doing. And now, though I had to go a little deeper and be a little more secretive because I'm living with my wife, and there's a little bit more logistical issues in trying to hide everything that I was doing. First year we got married, I ended up getting a computer, and that was when the internet was brand new, and we got dial-up access, and I started looking at porn again. Even when it took, 20 or 30 minutes for one picture to download, I started getting hooked again on porn. And what I told myself, and this is what I think a lot of addicts tell themselves, is I'm never going to go beyond, and then they just set a marker. It's just an arbitrary based on what they think they're never going to go beyond. The problem is there's two things I've learned about lust. And one thing is that lust is never satisfied. It's never satisfied. I mean, it's just, lust's mantra is more, more, more. It's always going to want more. And the second thing is that it will always demand that you cross lines that you said you'd never crossed before. Because the whole not being a virgin thing before I was married, I'd actually made a decision when I was a freshman in high school, an authentic, genuine, passionate decision that I would remain pure until I was married. My lust didn't care about that. It always wanted more, and it eventually demanded that I cross that line.
Pure passion that beats for Christ alone. Pure passion.
Well, I get married, and I start getting back into the pornography, and I start, masturbating and spinning fantasies of old girlfriends and things like that. And at first, I just didn't think these were things that would topple a marriage. At least as separate, isolated incidents, it didn't seem like it would mount up to being something that would destroy my marriage. But one day I was online, and I was in a chat room, and I was talking with this woman, and then two little words came across the screen: "Want to meet?" And I barely hesitated, and I said yes, and I met this woman and had sex with her. And so again, lust always demands that you cross a line you said you never cross. And so then I started using the internet to set up anonymous sexual encounters. It wasn't uncommon for me in the morning to get online, and then that night I'm having sex with a woman I just met online. And all of this I'm keeping a secret. And even as I'm doing all of this, I'm telling myself, okay, yeah, this is all wrong. Clearly this is all wrong. But I'll never do anything illegal. It's almost like wherever I was, that's where the standard shifted. And a lot of addicts do this. They compare themselves to people that they consider doing worse things. Oh yeah, well, I'm doing this, but at least I'm not doing what that guy over there did. And so I told myself I'll never do anything illegal, until one day I was online, and as I used to call it, putting out bait, and there was no bites, nothing was happening. And by that time, I was already kind of in the bubble, so to speak, where it's like kind of the point of no return. It's truly like any chemical addiction, in the sense that to get in that bubble, it's like you got to have your fix. You just got to have it, and everything just narrows to that one focus. Well, because nothing was happening online, I got in my car and went to a part of town that I knew that there were prostitutes. And I picked up a prostitute and I paid for sex. And so I just kept crossing these lines. And eventually, in the summer of '99, everything came crashing down. I couldn't carry the weight of it anymore. My wife was starting to wise up to certain things, because one thing about spinning one lie after another is that I don't care how intelligent you are, how, all of that, you're going to miss things. Eventually things are going to slip through the cracks. And that's what happened with me. I started, slips of paper with phone numbers and girls' names would pop up in the house that I forgot to throw away, or websites would pop up, and I'd have to try to explain all this stuff away. And eventually in July '99, I couldn't take it anymore. And so I actually confessed everything to my wife. I told her everything: the prostitutes, the affairs, the masturbation, the pornography, all of that. And I wouldn't recommend that guys do it the way I did it, because it was just like a dump truck. I just unloaded it all on her. And I've learned and gotten some good counsel on some better strategies of how you can actually confess. I'm still in the camp of total disclosure. I still believe that you need total disclosure in your marriage in order for it to be restored in a healthy way. But don't do it the way I did it. It was just an unloading. But one thing that happened when I confessed everything to my wife is, I didn't realize it at the time, but confession alone doesn't change anything. It's kind of like what we've been talking about. I confessed 1,000 times all these sins, but it didn't change anything. And that sounds a little odd, especially since I'm a Christian and we talk about confession a lot. It's very important in our lives. But what happened is, I confessed everything to my wife, and then a week later, I was in bed with another woman. And my wife found out about that. Actually, when I was driving back, when I got back from that encounter, my wife had her bags packed and she left. She says, "I'm done. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't want to see you or speak to you ever again." And it's like, at that moment, I realized there's got to be more to it than simply unloading what's in the dark and putting it out into the light. And it was in that moment when my wife left that my world crumbled to pieces. And I understood for the first time what brokenness really was about. Because now I was empty. I had nothing left. And at that moment, I feel like I had the clearest thought that I've ever had in my life. It's like I saw this path and I had one of two decisions to make. I mean, I only had two choices and that was it. And one of them was I could keep doing the addiction stuff, and I was really good at that. But it's almost like when I looked down that path, it only led to death or prison. And death was coming quicker than prison, because in the year prior to my wife leaving, I had actually put a gun to my head several times when she was out of the house, a loaded gun, and tried to think of one good reason not to pull the trigger. The depression was becoming overwhelming. But the other decision was to essentially return to the lover of my soul, to return to the God that saved me when I was 6 years old.